I can confirm the UK will recognise the State of Palestine by the United Nations General Assembly in September, unless the Israeli government takes substantive steps to end the appalling situation in Gaza, agree to a ceasefire, and commit to a long-term sustainable peace, reviving the prospect of a two-state solution. And this includes allowing the UN to restart the supply of aid and making clear that there will be no annexations in the West Bank.
I speak to Osama Nazzal. He's a West Bank-based Palestinian affairs analyst. He also worked for Voice of Palestine and other Palestinian newspapers in Ramallah and Jenin. And he now joins me from occupied West Bank. Good to see you. So a surprising development, as our correspondent was telling us. And you know what makes me really surprised about this development is the fact that this announcement came right after Keir Starmer met US President Donald Trump in Scotland. I mean, we all know what is Donald Trump's stance on Palestinian statehood. So certainly, with this announcement, Donald Trump won't be happy.
I think that there is a close coordination between the European states and the United States. Even we heard the statements by Donald Trump and by the State Secretary of the U.S. 2 days ago against the New York conference co-chaired by France and Saudi Arabia. But what happens in the dark rooms and what happens under the tables, we don't know. But what we know is that I don't think that Europe can go against the wish and against the desire of the United States. So maybe the American president has his own calculations regarding his relations with the Israeli occupation government and the Jewish lobby, the Zionist lobby in the United States. And that's why he doesn't want to declare openly that the United States does not reject this step by France and the UK, and maybe other European countries might join in the very near future, while under and behind the scenes, they tell their European counterparts that they are content with such a step and they are not against it. Especially the two-state solution is not, first of all, a Palestinian proposal. It is an international proposal. It was set by the United States, Europe, and all of the United Nations. And the PLO agreed to that in order to reach a compromise that would lead to an end to the Palestinian suffering and to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So I don't rule out the American consent to such a step by the European countries.
I mean, if it's happening behind the scenes, then of course what you just said makes a lot of sense, because on the surface, when it comes to public announcement, US's stance on these possible recognition of Palestinian statehood is quite clear, because it has been condemning all these announcements lately. Now, let's talk about the possibility of a ceasefire, because recently Israel introduced these so-called tactical pauses. Some of the restrictions on the entry of humanitarian aid were also relaxed. Of course, our correspondent from Gaza is telling us that still attacks continue. These tactical pauses are basically a media stunt by Israel. They're basically a lie. But given this development in international affairs when it comes to Palestinian statehood and the introduction of these so-called tactical pauses and the relaxation of the entry of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip, is that perhaps an indication that a ceasefire in Gaza is going to happen sometime soon?
Really, the failure of the last round of negotiations in Qatar, when the Americans and the Israeli negotiators withdrew from the negotiations, was a clear indicator that Israel is not interested in a permanent ceasefire with the Palestinians and ending a genocidal campaign against the people of Gaza. And today, according to different Israeli media outlets, there were consultations among the Israeli occupation government officials occupying parts of Gaza and annexing them to Israel, either for military purposes or for settlement purposes. We don't know, but this was the talk in Israel today. So I don't think that a ceasefire is possible unless Israel feels that the international community is going to translate all the diplomatic statements we have been hearing over the past few days into actions and political steps on the ground. For example, to impose sanctions on Israel, or for Europe to stop its association agreement with Israel and end its trade transactions with it.